Welcome to the Fast Lane. Nick Miles is our auto expert, so drop it into gear. You've got a green flag. Here's Nick.
Oh, Sunday, and it's beautiful. The Northwest. I have to tell you, though, I haven't spent much time in the Northwest, but it is beautiful out here, and it's not quite as beautiful as Hawaii and Costa Rica, where I was this week. Jen's giving me faces. I knew I was going to get that. I knew I was ready to get told off because I've been away for a week. Sorry, Jen.
It's okay. You look a little tanner, just a little jealous.
I look fatter, too.
Yeah, just a little, but I didn't want to tell you that.
I rented a car. I rented a car when I went to Hawaii, and it was a Mustang GT convertible, because you have to do a convertible when you're in Hawaii, right?
Of course.
And then I sat in traffic all the time. It's really depressing. And it was beat to hell. Like somebody had dragged every piece of luggage on the island of Maui in and out of the trunk. It was like just scratched to heck. And I looked at this car and I wanted to cry.
Would they take it off-roading?
Yeah, pretty much. And then it was an automatic transmission, and it would, if I brake, it would shift down really hard. I was like, yeah, it's a rental. Mm-hmm. There you go. They're good on resale, though. You can get them for cheap.
Yeah, no thanks. I'm good.
After 250,000 people have driven them and thrashed them to death.
Yeah, the road to Hana.
Yeah. They, you know, the one thing about Hawaii is it's sure, or Maui, which is where I was, it sure is beautiful to drive around, but there's so many tourists.
Yeah, that's
like,
the truth.
And it's a single lane highway, and there was an accident from the airport the night we landed, and so it took 3 hours to get to the hotel instead of 45 minutes.
Yeah, I've been to Maui like 5 times.
Have you?
Yeah, have you driven almost all the way around it?
No, we just went, we went around the one coast where we were.
Did you see Oprah's house?
No, I didn't know she had a house.
Oh,
yeah?
Yeah. Okay, well,
she has a
you're
good
missing
car.
out.
I know my friend had to sell her Rolls Royce first. She wanted to sell her Phantom.
Oh.
But that was in her house in Santa Barbara. Mm. So anyway, what's on today's show? We got a lot of stuff coming up on today's show. It's packed. I got some stuff that surprised me a little bit too when Jen told me about it. On Our Auto Expert today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the trip to Costa Rica, which was celebrating 30 years of Lexus. 30 years.
That's crazy.
1989 LS 400. And I drove one around Costa Rica. It's still such a great car.
Does it make you feel old, Nick?
I don't know if I wasn't alive when they first came out.
Oh, yeah, good try.
No, 30 years, they've come, in 30 years, they've come what took a lot of other car companies 100 years to do. Mm-hmm. So they've done pretty well. We're going to talk about that. Miriam Joie is going to join us on the radio. She's in to talk about some tech and some cool stuff.
Racing.
Took a racing. Mm-hmm. We got a whole slew of stuff I'm going to talk to Miriam about. The thing is, too, I don't want to paint the lines too much about what we talk to Miriam about because we never stick to the script. We always gets a bit crazy. We're going to be talking about the E-racing. The Formula E was yesterday. This is the interesting thing about Formula E. So the electric racing, and then the power goes out in New York. We'll see if that's conspiracy or has anything to do with it. Well, that's coming up. We're also going to talk about this. This is what surprised me on the show. The Apollo 11, we're going to celebrate 50 years of Apollo 11. July 20th, it was 50 years since the Apollo 11 mission. And that mission would not have happened, at least we didn't know about that mission, if it wasn't for Ford. Mm-hmm. Ford made that mission possible, at least the communication of that mission possible.
Yeah, we're going to have the historian on today.
Yeah, his name is Ted Ryan. He is Ford's archivist and heritage brand manager. Ted is going to tell us about how Ford made that Apollo 11 mission possible. What else are we going to talk about? We're going to have, we're going to discuss what's happening in electric cars with Anton Woolman. Everyone accuses me of just spending all my time knocking Tesla with Anton. I'm not a huge Tesla fan. Not because of the cars, because I think they're really intuitive and great pieces of machinery. But I think the business plan is not cool. And I know Miriam will have something to weigh in that because she's an owner. She liked it so much she bought a car. And we're also going to talk about, what else we got coming up, Jen? We're going to talk about, the e-scooters.
Yes, e-scooters.
These are my favorite thing right now. I have a pair of the roller skates, the electric roller skates.
That would be funny to watch
Segway
you
make
on.
'em.
Oh. Can
And
we
they
videotape
basically
that?
they go on each foot. But I haven't opened them yet. I've had them for like 7 months, and I haven't opened them
You
yet.
haven't been home to play with them
No,
yet,
that's true. So I haven't opened them yet. I don't know why. I just see bad things maybe are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I got a
Wrap you with bubble wrap.
Let's be honest. When in the Northwest can you use anything outdoors? It's like 3 months. I rode my motorcycle to work today for the first time. The first time I've had it out this year. How lame am I? I shouldn't even have a motorcycle. That's how lame I am. And then all the things they tell you not to do with a motorcycle.
You do.
I do. They say that you should always wear long pants and long sleeves.
I know.
You should always wear boots.
Okay.
What do I have on?
So the listeners can't see you, but let me just tell you, he's got red sneakers, bright green shorts, and a maroon and black striped shirt.
Yeah.
Who dressed you this morning?
The mirrors in my house are all broken.
Or is that all you had left over from your trip?
Yeah, the only things that weren't crawling around the laundry basket on their own. So, I'm in one of those don't care days. Like,
what's radio, baby? No one can see us.
See, that's why I do radio, because I have a face for it, and apparently the clothes for it, according to Jen. I shouldn't be anywhere else but radio. You know what? The color of my shoes don't clash with my shirt, though.
That's like a cherry red, and that one's kind of like a
polo shoes.
Burgundy. It doesn't matter.
All right. This is a car show, by the way.
I know.
Jen's Fashion Hour, brought to you by GiveNickAHardTime.com.
But the Triumph, it doesn't even match the Triumph.
Oh, dude. Do you match
Triumph's beautiful.
Do you match your truck?
Yes.
You do? You dress for your car?
Yes.
Right.
Sometimes I do.
You're scaring me a little bit now.
My car's black. My truck's black.
Right.
It's pretty simple.
What color's your car?
Black.
What color's your other truck?
Black.
All right.
Oh, the teal one. And then I have a teal truck, too.
Wow. All right. All that coming up on the Our Auto Expert. Honestly, this is the last time we're going to talk about colors. Coming up, real car stuff. We're going to get out of the way now and let the people that pay the bills do some talking. So depressing.
Keep listening. More of Our Auto Expert with Nick Miles is coming up. Start your engines and you're off. Back to Our Auto Expert with Nick Miles.
All right, so Miriam Schwartz joined us in the studio. Miriam, if you listen to podcasts, she has an amazing podcast. If you follow tech, you can follow Tank Girl Without the Valves on all the social medias. Is that right?
Yes.
Where do we find it?
The podcast is mobiletechpodcast.com, and it's on all the big podcast apps. And Tank Girl is my handle on Twitter, Without the Valves, TNKGRL, and on Instagram.
And I love watching your stuff, too. You don't hold back.
No,
There's many victims of Miriam.
Well, you gotta be real, right?
I watched one of your reviews on something, and I think it was the Google Pixel 3 and the XL and the regular, or the 2 and the XL and the XL, and you didn't hold back. You told everybody what was wrong with it. I like
People
that.
are going to spend their hard-earned money. It's not as bad as paying money on a car, but,
Yeah, on a phone. I have a Google Pixel. It's on a phone show, but I have
it's a color and a phone show.
Exactly.
I have a 3 XL.
Yeah, me too.
With a bad mic.
Oh,
and
bad mic.
I can't get them to replace it.
Yeah, Google is hard to deal with customer service. So.
Yeah, whatever. I just bought Samsung. I gave up. So let's talk about, they recently had the Formula E in Brooklyn, and strangely enough, Manhattan had no power the same day for 72,000 people lost power in Manhattan. It seems strange that we have an electric car race in one part of the city and the other part of the city, and no explanation yet, doesn't have any power. But
they said there was a transformer substation that crapped out in Manhattan, so I don't know about. But I mean, look, you never know, right?
It crapped out because they sucked all the power into Brooklyn for the Formula E race. The fire department said they were putting out multiple locations of fires of transformers, which sounds to me like shenanigans are afoot. But I'll leave it to the conspiracy theorists to uncover that one.
Oh, I'm sure they'll find something.
Formula E racing, when when electric car racing came about, and everybody, a couple of people started to promote it, everyone was like, how stupid is that?
Right?
Seems to have worked in somebody's favor.
I mean, it's not just Formula E, right? There's like all this other stuff happening in electric motorsports. Let me show you some stuff. Of course, Pikes Peak is pretty much dominated by electrics because it's not electric motors are not affected by altitude.
Right.
So I mean, we've solved this on gas cars with big turbos, but big turbos, much more complex than an EV. Then there is, of course, the Isle of Man is going electric. At least they have an electric motorcycle section now.
Yeah.
We've got...
I looked at the Harley Davidson electric motorcycle because I have a Triumph right now. And I looked at the Harley Davidson one. I thought, you know what? I don't ride mine enough to I could trade it in and not miss it and have an electric bike. Because I don't do it for the noise. There's a lot of guys who ride their bikes for noise. But it's $24,000.
Yeah, it's like the price of a medium-sized car.
Yeah. That's not happening.
And I mean, so FIA World Endurance is now doing an electric thing.
Okay.
Paris-Dakar has at least had one EV enter that finished the race.
Right.
Which is, technically the thing you want to do is the endurance, right? The part that's hard. Formula E, as we mentioned, there's a bunch of vehicle-specific races, like Jaguar has an I-Pace E-Trophy, and there's I think a Tesla race. Electric GT, where there's been some talk about 24-hour Le Mans cars that are EV-based. And then, of course, the World Solar Challenge, very different EV race, very slow, but super efficient EV race. And then, we're looking at, again...
Can it be a race if it's slow? I guess it can.
Well, it's a matter of who gets there first. So it could take 5 days. It's like, I guess...
It's like watching golf.
Yeah, it's probably pretty boring. But the technical aspects are interesting. I think that what I'm excited about is that, the record at Goodwood 20 years ago, right, done by an F1 car, has basically been beaten, not officially because it didn't happen during the actual official timing, but during testing, by something like 2 seconds.
They beat the
IDR, the Volkswagen Pikes Peak race car, did the Goodwood hill climb in I don't know, I have to look it up, 38, 39 seconds or something, less than 40, which is the big deal.
So, it's interesting. Yeah, my mind started to wander a little bit in that because I was thinking about this. Why aren't you doing the Rebel Rally in an electric car? That would be, you need to find another woman to do that with you.
Yeah, rally racing electric, I think, is coming. I mean, the reality is, if you look at a good half of the racing that happens that's not electric right now has some kind of hybrid system. KERS for Formula 1.
Because it makes sense.
Right? Almost all Le Mans cars are hybrids.
Instant power.
You need to recuperate. Remember, they're getting much more stingy on how much gas you can use. So you have to kind of recycle, and the only way to regen is either to compress some air and then release it later, or charge a battery and release that through an electric motor later. There's also gyro ones based. I don't know, remember Porsche made one that had a big spinning cylinder that they sped up, and then the inertia, basically recouped that energy and they could reuse it later. It was crazy. I don't remember when that was done. It was a couple of decades ago. And, here
most of these things don't make sense efficiency-wise for consumer
that's the thing.
cars.
30% efficiency for a gasoline engine, 90% efficiency for electric motor, right?
And hydrogen will be the big thing, right? Because that technically is electric, but then you have the fuel on board.
Correct.
You can go.
But
so
for
once
racing,
the charge
for
runs
racing, it's a matter of how fast can we make batteries that are lighter? Because in racing, you don't need big batteries,
right?
Unless you're doing Le Mans, and you can only charge once, right? Then you need a big battery.
Well, Formula E is the same way. You're allowed to swap a battery out. I think.
So there you go.
It's once.
So, but I think hydrogen makes sense for long distrances right now. But it's not as efficient. The fuel cell conversion process is not as efficient as
50% versus 90%.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And so
it's still a lot more efficient than gas.
I mean, the big thing is a lot of people, I'm sure, on the show here are going to say, well, what about the noise? It's very different, right? Obviously, that's the thing. To me personally, as a motorcycle rider, I love the idea of electric bikes, but what would really scare me is that I have no way of telling people I'm there, right? That's the thing about, I'm not a big fan of super loud motorcycles, but the fact that I can rev my engine, to let somebody know, hey, I'm behind you.
I honk my horn. I come out to an intersection and someone isn't looking at me. I'll honk my horn and they'll turn around and look at me because I want you to know I'm there. I don't need to tell you you've done anything wrong.
So maybe that's the solution because honestly, that's for cars. I don't care that it makes no noise, but for a motorcycle as a rider, it's kind of scary sometimes.
I just had 3 different vehicles in my house. I had the RAV4 hybrid, which runs on electricity alone, EV mode, low miles, and the Corolla, basically same sort of vehicle. They have a horrible noise when you back up, because that's when they're in EV only mode.
Right.
And it sounds like the brakes are stuck. The screeching's like,
oh, goodness.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea. And then the Range Rover P400e, which is a full-size Range Rover that now does about 30 miles on a single charge. So they say. I haven't quite ever got that myself, but you can charge it up and do, it's a plug-in hybrid. That beeps when you back up. And if the Range Rover wasn't big enough, it now feels like a delivery truck.
Oh, God.
So
I drive a tractor.
You know, in Europe, what is it, 2 weeks ago, they just passed the law.
The law, it's going to be
21 miles an hour.
2021 or something,
Yeah.
there's going to be a law.
Yeah, under 20 miles an hour, the vehicle has to make a sound. Now, the I-Pace makes an awesome sound. The guys who did the audio for the movie Judge Dredd designed the sound for the new I-Pace, and I'd buy that car for the sound alone. That's the best part of it.
And I actually think that's one of the areas where the traditional car makers are well equipped, because BMW and Audi, for example, have been pumping artificial noises in their cars forever now.
Yeah, through the
so they
speakers.
actually know how to do this right.
Yeah.
And if it's going to be a law, for better or for worse, let's make some good sounds, right?
Right. I want my car to sound like a spaceship.
Like, honestly, I'm kind of bummed that they're going to pass these laws, because as a Tesla owner and driver, I love the fact that it's perfectly silent. Now, of course, if it's a sound that goes to the outside, it's probably not going to be loud enough to be heard on the inside. But I still find it really weird. You know, like, I get it. You know, when you're a pedestrian, you don't hear that electric car creeping up on you. It's kind of scary. And for people who are, sight impaired, they rely on the ears a lot. It's really important for them to hear. But I question this because, I don't know. I'm not sight impaired, but I think a lot of people I know are sight impaired are so good with the ears. I would be surprised if they didn't hear the tires rolling towards them.
That's not the issue. It's the millennials.
You think so?
Yeah, they've always got their headphones on and they're looking down their phones.
Attention.
Yeah, they're the ones that are going to get killed by electric cars. Which, you know what? I mean, they might. Anyway.
I feel that I have to be more cautious when I drive my Tesla at slow speeds around pedestrians, like small streets or parking lots, because they definitely don't pay attention.
We're going to continue this conversation after a break. Miriam Joie is with us in studio. We're talking about electric cars and electric racing. You're listening to Our Auto Expert. You can find us 24/7 at OurAutoExpert.com and all the social media channels.
Stay tuned. There's more to come with Nick Miles. Jump right in and put the pedal to the floor. Our Auto Expert with Nick Miles continues.
In the studio today with us is Miriam Joie, and of course Jen is here making sure I stay true. Whatever. What do you do? You cattle prod me into doing the right things.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
We're talking about electric racing. So Formula E just happened, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, or maybe the underneath of the iceberg. Maybe there's a lot more famous stuff there. We're talking about the Goodwood Hill Climb. We're talking about some of the different things like Pikes Peak that's going on with Formula E cars. It looks like there's other races that are being created even as we speak.
Yes. So it turns out that there's this Odyssey 21, which is an electric off-road race truck that Formula E is kind of promoting and showing around to kind of promote a race idea that they have called Formula E Extreme. Now, I guess that would be kind of like a Baja or Paris-Dakar type deal. I don't know where it would take place. But basically, yeah, they're showing off this truck. It looks really badass. And yeah, I mean, EVs are, I think, pretty good for off-road because a lot of torque. And, as long as you got some energy to put in those batteries, somehow you're good to go. Especially since the segments are pretty short.
Do you think there is the possibility of perhaps at, say, something like the Ridge Motorsports Park in Seattle, or near Seattle, in Union, Washington, or PIR in Portland or something, doing a bring your electric vehicle to the track day where you could
be fun.
Race it. I mean, the recharging might be a pain in the backside because you can only do so many laps before it needed recharging. There's no battery swapping at your leaf.
A lot of racetracks that have like autocross events, like NASA and stuff, they have superchargers or really high speed chargers because a lot of Tesla people like to do it.
Yeah.
The nice thing is that the more modern EVs are much more resilient to heat degradation over time. So And with large battery pack, you can probably do several runs of a track before you really have to worry about charging. So I think as long as the chargers are there, people can start bringing in the EVs. And I think SCIA and NASA and other, bodies that promote racing for amateurs should I think should promote that. Some basic safety stuff, helmets. Hopefully you get track insurance for your car. Cause
would you race your Tesla? Would you take your Tesla to a racetrack?
Probably not, simply because it's not a performance model. Right. I think you'd want the performance if you did that, and I'd probably want to get special pads and wheels and tires to do it.
You think I'm always worried about it because we know Teslas are great on the 0 to 60. There's nothing.
So the Model 3 doesn't deteriorate with heat.
Okay,
but the S does because it's a different motor technology, permanent magnet. So it's not as subject to it. And also the performance model has special conditioning for the battery. Like you can push a button like 20 minutes before your race for the whole day and set everything up. Like the motors are heated up and the battery's heated up and it's ready to rumble. And then you can just do track after track after track until you need to charge, which will probably be on a short racetrack. You'd probably do at least 15 laps before you need to charge. I'm not talking about being at empty, but being at a place where you should be charged to get more energy density.
I think we need to get the local electric supplier in on this because they could sponsor it.
Like Pacific?
Pacific Power, PGE in Portland or whoever covers, I'm not sure who covers Union Washington, but get the local power company involved because there's nothing they like more is promoting superchargers and sticking their electricity available there. It would be kind of fun.
And tracks that also have a drag strip would be double whammo, right? Because you could do, drag racing between different EVs.
I'm sure you can almost set the straightaway up in any track to be to be the drag strip. So you could do drag in the morning and laps in the afternoon.
It's inevitable that within a few years, with more and more EVs out there, this is going to happen.
We should call Rusty
people starting to modify EVs too, right? People are starting to tinker and jack up their EVs and make them faster and perform better, like throw out weight and all kinds of stuff.
They're all geeks though.
Well, I would argue that car nerds that fix up cars are also geek, but in the car world. So there's a cross section there, right? Like I know people look at me, right? I am a bit of a nerd. Like I have a podcast about telephones and mobile tech, but I love cars and I'm a car enthusiast. I love driving stick. I love driving, a nice screaming flat 6 or V8. Like I love it. But at the same time, I also love the EV stuff. So for me, I think there's a lot of crossover.
I'm just fascinated by things I don't understand. And so I want to experience EV racing because I want to understand it more. I want to understand what it's like and how far you can go and how the car holds up. I'm super interested in how a Leaf would hold up on that. I'm super interested because I'm pretty sure like the Model S is going to just be amazing. But I'm interested in how people who bought electric cars, an i3, how does it hold up on the racetrack?
I think very few people have taken those out because they're just not considered very fast compared to the Teslas. I think that's why the Teslas are so dominant in that area, right? In fact, there's a lot of races between Teslas and normal cars, like drag racing, like Hellcat versus Tesla Model S. You see that on TV, on YouTube all the time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But I think that you're right. As it gets cheaper, like once Volkswagen does their ID cars and they're sold in the US and they're going to be 25, 30,000, right? We're going to start seeing people go like, hey, instead of putting high performance cars that are 40, 60, 70, $100,000 one against each other at the drag strip, why don't we take your Leaf Plus
$7,000
and my VW ID? Or how about used electric cars? I'll take my Fiat 500 versus your Ford Focus EV from 10 years ago.
This conversation will be continued. I can feel it coming. We're going to talk about this. I just want to alert you, coming up next, we're going to get a chance to talk to Ted Ryan from Ford, and he's going to tell us how Ford made the original Apollo 11 mission absolutely possible. Without Ford, it never would have happened. You're listening to Our Auto Expert. Find us at ourautoexpert.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and that Instagram thing. See pictures of new cars, even my face.
Stay tuned. More of Our Auto Expert with Nick Miles is on the way. Our Auto Expert continues. Here's your host, Nick Miles.
I have to say, I hope you're enjoying summer driving. This is definitely the weather to do it. All right. So, I was surprised when I found this out, but the Ford helped enable the Apollo missions to land on the moon. With the 50th anniversary of the moon landings on July 20th, I wanted to share some information with you and bring somebody on to talk about this. A surprise that actually that mission would never have happened. At least we would never have known about that mission if it hadn't been for Ford. And joining us on the phone is Ted Ryan. He is Ford's archivist and heritage brand manager. So this was a surprise to me, Ted. Was it a surprise to most people to know Ford's involvement in the Apollo mission landings?
Nick, yes, it is. And thank you so much for having me on today. Even with our own associates, it's been a bit of a surprise the past 6 months as I've been walking around Ford telling this story and trying to gain some traction. So, yes, it is a surprise. But Ford Motor Company, via Philco Ford, its space subsidiary, played a huge role in landing man on the moon and communicating that back and forth.
So tell us what Ford's role in that historic moment was.
Okay, I've got to take it back a little bit. So Ford purchased Philco. Philco invented the miniaturized transistor, enabling satellite communications. And Ford purchased them in 1961 and formed the Ford Philco unit. Ford had an aerospace unit already. It folded it into it. So Ford Philco was granted the contract to build Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas. So that famous Houston Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. That Mission Control Center is what Ford Philco built. The numbers are just staggering. More than 60,000 miles of cable, 1,500 different items of telemetry data. At one point, it was the largest housing of television switching equipment in the world. So those visual images that you have when you see Mission Control, the giant visual map, everything, that was conceived and built by Ford Philco.
And then how did that play a role in the event itself? So, the center itself was really the heart of space travel, right?
It was, and there's one, it's my favorite quote, and I actually have it on the front of the notebook that I started. The Mission Control, I'm reading this from a 1969 document. The Mission Control Center had to be designed to do things that had never been done before, but because there wasn't time to wait, built with the electrical technology available in 1960. And that's what Ford did. So the ability to track the spaceship as it moved, the Apollo 8 mission, which was before 11, obviously, but where the lunar module went around the moon and they lost touch with it because, the moon blocks the transmission. That ability to recapture the signal, that was based on Philco Ford satellite and communications satellites. And then the way that the data was presented, the visual look where Philco did 3 years of research to discuss or to discover what is the best way to present data where the flight controllers can make instantaneous decisions. And it was decided that a combination of visual, the giant map on the wall, the digital, the lights and the screens in front of them, and then analog, the dials and switches was the best way to communicate this data. They had to make instantaneous decisions. And if you watch the moon landing, the Apollo 11 landing, you'll see that a switch actually went off, which almost caused them to abort the landing. And it was the ability to process that data that was conceived by Ford Philco and built out at Mission Control.
So all those years ago was obviously a historic moment. Take us through what's been going on with Ford and this now. Was that the last time Ford had their hands involved in space travel, or have they continued to be involved in advancing tech and discovery?
They were. Ford rebranded that unit as Ford Aerospace in 1975 and played a role in all of the space shuttle missions. They actually redesigned the center to accommodate for the space shuttle. They did a great ad where it says Philco Ford has been with the astronauts every step of the way, talking about it. Ford sold off the aerospace unit in 1990, but that same technology, the same thirst for knowledge is still driving the business today, and just investing $11 billion in battery, electric, and hybrid vehicles, launching autonomous vehicle business to scale in 2021. I always joke because the guy that controlled the lunar rover, the space buggy, the moon buggy, was actually a Ford employee. And so we had Ford Pass and autonomous driving even then, because he was sitting on the ground in mission control, monitoring how the moon buggy was going during Apollos 15 and 16. So that same spirit and thirst for knowledge that drove Ford Aerospace to produce mission control and to allow, you wouldn't have heard Neil Armstrong's words if it weren't for Ford Aerospace. I keep calling it different things because they change their name so many times. So Philco Ford, you wouldn't have heard Neil Armstrong's words if it weren't for Philco Ford.
So what lessons did, and we'll just call it Ford, we'll make it easy. What lessons did Ford learn from their involvement in those historic moments in, out of the earth travel, that they were able to bring back for other things? Because we hear many times that the microwave and that seats in cars and all these things are thanks to space travel. But I presume that some of that information and some of those great leaps for man were used to further other industries, not only space travel. So did Ford actually ever bring any of that back and use it in cars or use it in other things that they were doing?
They did, and it's interesting that you bring it up in that particular way, because a lot of the engineers would rotate through the Ford Aerospace back to the company, and some of the changes that you saw were simple ones, like the way that the radio systems were reintegrated, making it more compact and concise within the car. Some of the aerodynamic research that they would do, the people that would work on the satellites, particularly the launches, would take that aerodynamic learning, bringing it back to the company when you see your classic wind tunnel testing and some of those aerodynamic elements. So the main thing is the quest for knowledge and remaining curious. So if you were a scientist with Ford Aerospace and you're reassigned back into Dearborn and you're working on cars, you're bringing that same curiosity, that same scientific thirst back and forth back to the company. As part of this project, I've actually gone back and interviewed and done oral histories with several of the engineers who've worked on the NASA program. And it's interesting, they do go back and forth from the auto industry to the aerospace, because it's that thirst for science that's driving the scientists and driving the research.
So that was back then, and I know, looking at Ford now, looking at some of the innovations the engineers have, for instance, growing soy to fill seats in cars, or using bottles to make interior door panels, or whether it's inventing something that helps test the durability of the seat and making sure that the blue jean dye doesn't rub off on the inside of your car seat. Do you think that anything at Ford today is different and is, I guess, monumentally changed because of this program? Or do you think that this program really was much more of a standalone item?
No, I don't. I think this program incorporated in the Ford core belief of freedom of movement and freedom, because the soybean example you used is actually interesting because it's being reused now, but that was started by Henry Ford in the 30s to use soybean in the manufacturing of automobiles and to test like that. So I would say that it's in the Ford DNA to be insatiably curious and to use that scientific thought, that thought process that brought you the V8 flathead, that brought you the soybean infused car, that brought all the changes over time, was just one more element within Ford Aerospace. When I have talked to the scientists, when I've talked to the engineers, and when I've talked to them today, and as they have contact or take the tours within the archives to learn about the past, it's part of the Ford DNA to have that incessant curiosity and the spirit to always innovate. If there's one hallmark of Ford Motor Company, it's been innovation over the years. If you look at the advent of safety glass, all the different innovations that Ford has done over the years. So the Apollo mission, it's interesting. There was a quote from one of the oral histories at the time that said that Philco was chosen. It was not the biggest bidder for the project by any means. You had IBM and AT&T and Bendix and Hughes Aerospace and Lockheed. But Philco was chosen in part when the NASA executive said, because they knew they had the might of the Ford Motor Company behind them, and that Ford Motor Company would ensure that it worked and would do anything to make sure that it was successful. Because, like I said, they were making up technology that didn't exist at the time.
How are Ford going to partake in the celebrations of 50 years of man's first steps on another sphere? I wouldn't call it a planet, but another sphere.
It's primarily it's internally focused with the employees to celebrate what we did in the past and how that relates to the business today, and that's what matters. And just some of the examples I threw out, the displays that we're creating for the employees will highlight the advent of that technology. There's one other line that I love. They had to make a major computer-assisted decision-making capability, which no one had when Philco Ford received the contract. And implement it within 2 years. Well, we're doing the same thing now as we're introducing our battery electric vehicle line and enhancing our hybrid line, and the work that we're doing with Argo with the autonomous vehicle program. So that same spirit of technology is being applied today with today's real life business decisions. And that, we did it once before in 1969, and we can do it again today. And it's that same message that we're relaying to our employees. So most of our celebrations are internally focused with our associates as we celebrate an achievement that we did in the past, and we look to the future with that achievement, knowing that we can do it again.
If we don't understand our history and our past and where we came from, I think the truth is we are unfortunately going to repeat it in a sense of making mistakes, but let's hope we can repeat it in the innovation that Ford celebrated. Well, congratulations to Ford for being part of a 50-year history and the first footsteps on the moon. If someone wants to find out more about this, is there anywhere that they can go, Ted?
There will be on the 20th. We're going to launch a blog post on Medium that is going to have all of the details. I gave you a very high-level version of the history, but it's going to have the details of what Ford did and how we did it, the different partners that we worked with over time. So the Medium blog will be available on the 20th. And if I can, I have our PR folks give you a link for that site when it's going to go live.
Ted, it's been a pleasure having you on. A very monumental part of American history, a very monumental part of Ford's history. Ted Ryan is the Ford archivist and the Heritage Brand Manager, celebrating 50 years of Ford helping get an American man on the moon, which of course we all know was Neil Armstrong. Who knew that Ford had their fingers so embedded in space travel? You're listening to Our Auto Expert. If you want to find out more about that, we'll be sure and post on our social media website, Our Auto Expert, on the Facebook page, on also Instagram, and of course Twitter. We'll give you that information as soon as that launch of the actual website showing Ford's in-depth involvement in putting a man on the moon. We'll be back. Coming up, Miriam Joie in studio. We're going to talk more about Formula E and Tesla and modern-day travel.
Don't go away. There's more to come with Nick Miles. Our Auto Expert will be right back.
And that includes my rental insurance on my office in San Francisco as well. So I really don't know. I think my insurance for the cars is $150 out of that, probably.
I have great insurance too, because it insures all of our gear, broadcast gear, and vehicles that we rent.
I think the thing is to lump it together and have a good driving record, no accidents for a really long time, all that stuff. It adds up.
Yeah, I don't think I've had an accident. Touch radio, touch microphone.
I was going to say, don't even jinx me or anybody.
Nick Bulio, probably butchered his last name, joining us on the phone. Nick is from insurancequotes.com. So here's the deal. Most of us don't understand either purchasing a car and the financing or insurance. Are we on board with most other Americans, Nick?
That is pretty accurate. Yeah, I would say so. Insurance is one of those things, and I appreciate you guys having me on. it's one of those things that everyone knows they kind of need it, but all of the intricacies and nuances, most people just don't bother with. It's sort of they purchase it and that's it. And, so helping folks figure out some of those nuances is one of the things that I do in writing the pieces I do for insurance quotes.
One of the things that I like to do is have my insurance tailored for me personally, because I'm very different from 99.9% of other people. I mean, I have vehicles in my driveway that are, jacked up on 35-inch tires and need a ladder to get into. And then, I will go somewhere like Costa Rica and rent a car, and I want to make sure I'm covered. So it's most Americans, do they fall in between the lines, or are many of Americans like me and Miriam and Jen sort of fall outside of the lines?
It seems that the average American driver, their insurance needs aren't necessarily going to be, well, I hesitate to say this, but I mean, there is sort of a base middle where a standard auto policy is going to suffice. But then when you do get into the weeds of talking to individuals, you do find out that a lot of people have certain nuances. A car that's in their driveway that they're not driving, what should be done with that? How do they handle rental vehicles and things when they're traveling? So people do have unique needs, and one of the things that I always tell people to do is actually get on the phone with whoever it is that you're buying insurance from. It's so easy to do everything on the internet and just answer a couple quick questions and get a quote and call it a day. But when you talk to somebody, you can do what you were just saying, like have it tailored to your specific needs and the nuances of your circumstance.
So you guys did a survey, and what were the things that most surprised people about that survey?
Well, there were a couple of findings in the survey. One of the ones that was at the top of the list was that 68% of Americans actually incorrectly believe that comprehensive auto insurance covers car damage from a collision. And this was really surprising to us because that's a pretty big mistake to make. And for folks to not necessarily have a good handle on the difference between, say, collision, comprehensive, and liability insurance was pretty startling. It's kind of the baseline of where folks should have an understanding, because it has to do precisely with, what are you actually being covered for? And then one of the other things that we touched on in this survey had to do with the increasing popularity of electric scooters and scooter sharing companies that are cropping up in U.S. cities all over the place. And in the survey, we found that 36% folks incorrectly believe that electric scooter riders are required by federal law to have liability insurance, which they're actually not. Some of the local jurisdictions may vary depending on the city or municipality in terms of what they require for scooter rental or scooter sharing companies. But in terms of individuals, if you just go out and buy one of these electric scooters, that you're really not required to carry liability insurance, which is something that a lot of folks apparently didn't necessarily know.
So then I guess if there is a collision involving a scooter, it comes down to either the law or then someone taking you to court. It doesn't come down to, either you get a ticket and you get charged with something for something reckless that you did, or then there's an involvement of somebody taking you to court because they didn't like something that happened. But there's no baseline there.
No, and I mean, you certainly could. There's two things to consider if someone's out there and they own one of these scooters or they're thinking about getting one. The first call that I would make would be to my auto insurance company, and I would say, I'm buying one of these. Is there any sort of rider or something that I can get liability coverage for when I'm on this scooter that I could do through you guys? And chances are they'll probably, be able to work something out. So you can you can set the stage for being covered, but I don't think that most people are necessarily doing that. And these scooters, they're electric, and so, this isn't a motorcycle. You're not going 80 miles an hour down the highway.
You hope.
But they can still, right. But you still you can get these things up to 15, 20 miles an hour, and they're very popular in cities, in urban areas where there's lots of traffic, lots of pedestrians, and so the potential for something to happen, it's kind of high.
I mean, people lose their lives on these things all the time. So, there's a possibility there. I would be more inclined to look at medical coverage because obviously, well, not obviously, now I can't say that anymore because most people don't really know. But a lot of times, if you have an accident in a vehicle, it's not your health insurance that covers you, but the car insurance that covers you. And it's required to under law for certain situations. I'd be more inclined to make sure that if I came off this scooter in conjunction with hitting something, either mobile or not, that I would have some sort of medical insurance to cover me. So that would probably be my first one.
Absolutely. I was going to say, my second call would be to whoever my health insurance provider is and find out, what are the stipulations here? If I'm involved in an accident on this thing, how does that shake out? And you're right, because that is incredibly important to know. So yeah, definitely checking in with whoever your health insurance provider is and getting that straight.
One of the things that I always do when I advise people on buying a new vehicle is, check the insurance rates before you drive it off the lot, because you may think that you're getting into something that is safe and is because of its brand, because of its size, because of its modernity, you could be looking at something that you feel is a good insurance choice, and be surprised when you get the insurance bill goes up. I also thought it was kind of interesting to see that having one of the incorrect beliefs was having a red car increases your insurance rate. So. The two most there's important things in the world, and many people fail at meeting just the minimum bar of it. Listen, Nick, if we want to find out more about this survey, where can we go?
You can go to insurancequotes.com. It is presently up there on our homepage, and you can also find me most easily on Twitter at Nick DiUlio. NickDiulio.
Excellent, Nick. Thanks for joining us. Nick, helping us set the record straight somewhat about how we feel and what we understand about insurances. I'm now going to be careful when I ride my electric roller skates around town.
More Auto Expert with Nick Miles is on the way. He's Nick Miles, and this is our Auto Expert.
All right, welcome back to the show. This is the part of the show where we get to be joined by our, we'd like to call him our mad scientists, and he is a little bit crazy. Anton Woolman is here in the studio, is Jen. Miriam Joire is with us. Anton on the phone. All right, Anton, it was a jaw dropper when we read this. The head of Volvo considering moving the company out of Sweden.
That's right. He gave a number of reasons for it. For example, lack of ability to recruit talent. And that, of course, raises the question, why is it suddenly so difficult to recruit capable talent to the automotive business in Sweden? And one of the reasons that he gave was just an enormous increase in the level of violent criminality around where Volvo is headquartered in Gothenburg, and that ended up causing quite a bit of a political stir in Sweden in the recent days when this interview became public.
Now, I am not one to be a major conspiracy theorist, but on this occasion, now we know Volvo's owned by the Chinese, and there would be nothing better for the Chinese to want to move it to probably China. But is that on the table? Is this the softening of the world before they make an announcement in 2 or 3 years, or is it you just think he's really him, or do you think the Chinese want Volvo in their backyard?
As we said during the Cold War, there is no such thing as a coincidence, and I certainly emphasize conspiracy at any and every point. But in this case, I think there's probably a little bit of truth to both of those potential causes of this. One is the idea that the Chinese, they're essentially almost 100% owners. China owns, through Geely, owns about 95% of Volvo cars, that they have some interest in bringing some of the talent back to China. Yet at the same time, it's also definitely some truth to what the CEO of the car business did say. I mean, he had no reason to make that up. And so I think there could be multiple reasons here. What they eventually decide to do, we don't know yet. The company has not actually taken any specific action. You may recall that a couple of years ago, they hired their new chief technologist from one of the top German companies, and they have certainly been able to recruit from some of the other automakers. Yet at the same time, they lost their number 2 interior designer to Tesla about 3 years ago. So certainly people do move around, and I don't think we've seen enough high-profile departures yet to really warrant that sort of an angle to the matter. But I think this is simply a case where we have to monitor what they decide to do here in the coming quarters and years.
There's one thing the Chinese have that nobody else particularly has like they have, and that's bags of money. So surely they can offer bags of money to people to come to work for Volvo. So recruiting to me sounds highly suspicious, because if it's a money thing, but why don't they do what many other companies do and set up studios in San Diego or, in London?
They have a studio in Southern California. They have, of course, an increasing manufacturing presence in South Carolina. So they certainly have done some of those things. But if you look more broadly, what has happened recently, you may have seen that SF Motors, the entity that purchased the old defunct Hummer factory in somewhere in the Midwest. They, of course, also hired a couple of years ago through essentially an acqui-hire, Martin Eberhard, the co-founder of Tesla, and they were going to make a big splash with their new all-electric crossover that was going to launch in the U.S. in the next couple of years. And now they basically said, we're pulling back. They're essentially laying off the vast majority of their Silicon Valley employee base, and they seem to have pulled back on all sorts of ambitions. And it's clear that the Chinese home market no longer affords them the ability to hire and maintain the level of staff that it will take to bring a car out in a competitive manner here in the near future. And this is something that we're going to probably hear more about in the very near future, as there are many companies in a similar position as SF Motors was. And we have about 475 of them in China in terms of electric vehicle startups. And I think it's pretty clear that not even the most optimistic of all optimists believe that all of those can come even close to surviving to a full cycle going forward.
But interesting enough, companies like GAC Motors have opened their third research facility in the United States now, and they've been promising every year that their vehicles will be on sale the following year. So there's definitely some intent to do business outside of China.
Yeah, GAC tends to promise it's always 18 months out, right? It's always 18 months out. We're going to have a distribution network in the United States, and here they have a huge booth always at the Detroit Auto Show. We'll see if that happens yet again for the umpteenth time. So what's happening in a situation like this, it's a little bit of a game where who will blink first, because the money that all of these companies are predominantly fed through credit in the Chinese banking system that is heavily influenced by local and regional political considerations. You may know the company Byton, for example, which is heavily funded and headquartered in Nanjing and heavily supported by the Nanjing government. So they, of course, lean on the banks in that particular region to basically fund this company in order to take the company to fruition. And eventually, not every little city, not every little province can have their own automaker, because at some point you end up in this situation where we have now arrived when there are over 470 of them. So at some point somebody has to blink, and that blinking phase becomes a bit arbitrary. So whereas GAC has not yet blinked, or I should say rather their owners and their creditors haven't blinked, any one of these parties, they haven't blinked until the moment that they do blink. And as little as a week ago, we had no idea that SF Motors was suddenly going to effectively fold purely out of thin air here, out of left field, and suddenly it happened. So I don't expect these guys to be the last guys where that will happen, and especially in an environment in which China is now cutting their EV subsidies by about half. That becomes a big problem.
All right, so what's the next move from Volvo? Are we going to see an independent inquiry to relocate, or do you think it's just...
Well, I think at this point, these were the earliest of musings by the CEO of the automotive business entity, and I'm not aware that any concrete decision has been taken, so I think in this case we simply have to wait to see what they actually do in practice. This was him speaking out in an interview in one of the largest dailies in Sweden, and he just basically gave his concerns. Maybe it was because they've actually planned something that is going to happen here just around the corner, but we haven't seen anything concrete as of yet.
Anton, we'll be back with you in a moment. We'll talk Tesla sales and also about iPace. You're listening to Our Auto Expert. OurAutoExpert.com is the place you can find us 24/7 or on all the social media channels. That's Twitter, Facebook, and the Instagrams. We're right there.
More of Our Auto Expert with Nick Miles is coming up.
From the Pacific Office Automation Studios, this is FM News 101, KXL.
Time to set it on cruise control. This is Our Auto Expert. Now, here's Nick Miles.
Miriam Joie in the studio with us, also on the phone, Anton Wallman. Jen is here. We are talking about the industry and what's going on. Let's talk about Jaguar for a few minutes, Anton. One of the things that we've noticed with them, and I've noticed this from the automotive end, that they had some rough times in the last 12 months, and they've basically, like a tortoise, gone inside the shell and really stopped interacting with, stopped spending money on PR and media and a lot of those things. So what's going on with iPace and its sales, and how's it doing?
So the iPace, which first started deliveries in Europe in September of last year and in the U.S. just barely a month after that, reached by about March of this year an annualized sales rate of just about 20,000 a year, which was frankly pretty much as expected. The company hasn't talked much about whether it has yet expanded these sales into China, which was the intent at the time. But of course, what happened in the meantime is that there's other sales around the world, most notably in China, certainly of all their other models, pretty much collapsed. And in some of the European home markets, the sales of the Range Rover diesels also saw a decline. So the company has ended up on pretty harsh times. And of course, when it comes to the iPace, the company does not, at least not yet, break out its contribution to profitability. The company has definitely no intent of breaking that out because they don't want people to know the economics of their complicated business relationship with Magna at a bare minimum, or how much they are internally subsidizing or not subsidizing their iPace sales. So we're in a little bit of a limbo here. The company has reached a little bit of cruising altitude for the iPace, yet at the same time, in just the last 3 or 4 months, the sales of the Audi e-tron has come up, but has already trounced the iPace by almost 2 to 1. The Audi is selling roughly 30,000 cars per year annualized right now, and is still increasing in sales as we speak because they're earlier in their launch cycle and hasn't yet launched in a few other geographies. So that's where it stands right now. And of course, we have Mercedes starting this quarter as well. So how big is the market really? Are people simply taking market share from the Tesla Model S and X, where sales have declined by almost 50% in just the last 6 to 9 months? Or is the entire market for higher-end electric vehicles, higher-end being defined as those that cost above $65,000 to $70,000, actually increasing? These are the questions that we really would have to resolve themselves here during the second half of 2019.
I mean, there's only a certain amount of people that can buy an electric vehicle, right? It's not really available to everybody in the United States. So you have limited people, and those people then you have to convert from gasoline vehicles. So that's a tough one. And then at the same time, you also have the projected, 100 new electric vehicles coming in the next number of years?
Oh, gosh, there'll be 200 of them by 2022. I think that what the manufacturers are counting on is a greater increase of various flavors of government subsidies, mandates, and other incentives. If you take a country such as Norway, a regular car is taxed at 100% as an excise tax, plus another 25% value-added tax, effectively what we call a sales tax in the United States. So if a car were to cost, $100,000 in the U.S., that same car in Norway would be, $225,000 at a bare minimum. So the incentive to buy an electric car that is not taxed at all becomes very, very high. That's one way to go about doing it. The other way to go about doing it is just giving some sort of direct subsidy. And of course, governments are all stretched for money and in general are not loath to want to subsidize these things very heavily. But that's the tension right now between the mandates of all the automakers having to sell electric cars and the lack of profitability in doing so, and what policies the governments are or aren't pursuing in order to make that happen. And that is an enormous tension that is weighing on the profit and profitability of all the automakers. Look at, for example, Daimler. For 4 quarters in a row, believe it or not, 4 quarters in a row, the company has now warned that their profits are going to be lower and lower and lower. They've had 4 quarterly straight misses, and this just happened, of course, most recently in conjunction with their CEO transition, and nobody's being dealt a very happy hand here. We just saw 2 weeks ago that the CEO of BMW is out. So who is next?
So let me just, recap this in a sense too. There are all these electric vehicles coming that are going to do very well in Europe, but if I look at this correctly, look at the U.S. government and our president doesn't seem very favorably interested in bringing more subsidies in for electric cars. The likelihood is, unless there's a presidential change in the next year and a half, that we probably won't see that. And does that put into question electric vehicles in the United States?
Well, there are many ships passing in the night here. We have federal legislation, we have state legislation, and of course, there are a handful of states, actually just over 10 of them, that have joined together to essentially introduce a mandate that a certain percentage of electric cars need to be, a certain percentage of cars need to be electric by 2025, about 16% by 2025, and then another 8% on top of that need to be plug-in hybrids. And then it's up to the automakers to basically sell as many units, and if people will not voluntarily buy them at a profitable price, then essentially then what happens is that those automakers have to internally subsidize those vehicles, and they do so essentially by raising the prices on all the other cars that they sell, both in those states as well as in the other states that are lacking such mandates. So if you're living in Randomville, North Dakota somewhere, and you're just out there trying to buy a Volkswagen Jetta or a Chevy pickup truck or whatever it may be, you're going to have to be paying a couple of grand extra in order for somebody in San Francisco to buy an Audi e-tron or Jaguar I-Pace at a few tens of thousands of dollars less than they otherwise would have had to pay. So that is going to be a tremendous tension, and I'm not even sure that most people are aware of what's going on there behind the scenes, because this is unlike the tax credit. It's not an actual pure dollar amount that the government essentially shows to you how much you're gaining by doing this, and that money, of course, comes from somebody else, but it's really hidden under the surface of the skin of the entire pricing structure. So we've just started that whole saga, and this will be playing out, I think, very harshly over the next couple of years.
We only look at car sales. They're going to be down around 2 million sales this year, from 18 million approximately down to around 16.
Not quite. I mean, there were 17.2 last year.
All right.
The latest projections are there'll be about 16.7 this year. So a decrease by about 500,000. Yet at the same time, if you look at the mix inside the sales that are going on right now, a higher and higher percentage of the cars that are actually sold are, relatively speaking, more expensive SUVs and crossovers that are going toward the large pickup trucks, large SUVs, as opposed to smaller sedans. I mean, the Chevy Cruze is going away. The Ford, whatever that thing is, going away. Their second cheapest car and their cheapest car as well. All of those ones are going away, and they're selling more pickup trucks and Explorers and Expeditions instead. So the units are going down a little bit, but if you're looking at industry-wide revenue, it's essentially looking to be about flat this year because the mix is improving for them.
And those big vehicles like full-size pickup trucks, they gain a car company a lot more profit too, because it's cheaper for them to make.
They should be more profitable, and they have been more profitable, but even that is changing for two reasons. Reason number one is the sheer output of those larger vehicles increasing. Just look at the number of 3-row SUVs, new ones that didn't exist before, that have entered the market in recent months, or at least the last year or two. You got the BMW X7, you got the Subaru Ascent, you got the Hyundai Palisade, the Kia Telluride. You got several of these all new ones. The Volkswagen Atlas didn't exist 3-4 years ago. So the new entries in these spaces mean that eventually the profit margins have to come down a little bit there. And then secondly, what vehicles are going to subsidize all of these EVs in terms of new fees that these companies are going to have to use in terms of their internal cross-subsidization? Well, that is going to be those large SUVs. So that's why there's going to be margin pressure even for those vehicles in the time periods going forward here.
In the few minutes that we have remaining, let's talk a little bit about the announcement between Ford and VW this week.
Yeah, so a couple of things happen here. Basically, Volkswagen invested in Argo, which was an entity in which Volkswagen had a minority interest. This is an entity that is focused on autonomous driving. They did so at a pre-market valuation of $7 billion. And between Volkswagen and Ford, those two companies now hold a majority of the shares in that particular entity. In addition to that, Ford bought itself into Volkswagen's lower cost all electric platform, the so-called MEB, that where we see the first fruit of that product line in just a few months from now. And they've said that they're going to introduce at least one and perhaps two vehicles specifically for the European market built on that platform, but where Ford is going to design the body on top of the platform and its interior. So the one thing that was a little bit surprising here, but probably shouldn't have been at the same time, is that Ford is not abandoning its own internal electric car developments. They have two of them, one for the Ford F-150, where they reconfirmed yet again that they're working on an all-electric Ford F-150, and secondly, that crossover that is so-called Mustang expired, and I think we all have seen it in the studio basically, and it's absolutely beautiful. That will be out. It will be in dealerships next year. So Ford is continuing with those two platforms, and those two platforms will in turn yield other variants in the years to come. So the agreement with Volkswagen that Ford struck here is an addition to those. So there are really no major cost savings here if you think about it, which was perhaps a little bit surprising to some.
The inside word from my spies in the industry tell me that I think they were nicknaming it the Mach 1, but whatever that vehicle, the Model X sort of Ford will be revealed is likely at the LA Auto Show in November.
That makes sense from a timing perspective. All of the manufacturing people in the industry said that the product is going to go into production in April of next year. So a reveal in November of 2019 would certainly make sense from a timing perspective.
Anton, where can we read your stuff?
Seeking Alpha and TheStreet.com.
Anton Wahlman, he is an independent investor and analyst. We always thank him for his input onto the show. Miriam, you got any plans? You driving up and down the West Coast?
I usually drive the Tesla up and down. It's like a business class flight, you know? Autopilot, chill out.
If someone's driving and they want to listen to your podcast, where do they go?
MobileTechPodcast.com, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Spotify, everywhere.
Everywhere. Miriam's everywhere.
Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, TNKGRL.
Miriam, I thank you. Jen, I thank you. You can find us 24/7 at OurAutoExpert.com and, of course, on all the social media channels that are relevant to your life.